we're going to do a deep dive tonight. We're going to do, I'm going to give you some more practical stuff, but I'm really going to go heavy in on the kingdom lens of finance and the kingdom, the kingdom of God. One of the reasons I think it's really important to do that is, because we live in a democratic republic, we don't necessarily understand kingdom really well. It's just true, because we think that you get to vote on everything, and it doesn't work like that in the kingdom at all. And so those things apply to finances, and the reason it's important is because it also applies to the way that you think about it, the way you think about business, the way you think about money, all of this other stuff. And so I'm going to show you several things. First thing I'm going to do, though, I told you last week that I was going to give you the 4 levels of value. Remember, we talked about last week that if you want to create income at any given level, at any given time, if you obsess over solving someone's problem and then you obsess over creating value for that person, then you're never going to be out of an opportunity for making money, making income, okay? It's just going to happen. People are going to pay you to solve their problems. And the higher level problem you solve, the higher the revenue that comes in, okay? And so, and I'm going to talk to you about that. We're full tonight. We are full tonight. So I hope you're ready to write fast and listen even faster. So we're going to be full. Value is important. I made this statement last week, and it sometimes it can sound a little like, I don't know if I like that or not, but it really is true. Right now, you're currently being paid at the level of value that you're creating. Notice what I'm saying. I'm not saying that you're being paid what you're worth, but you're being paid at the level of value that you're creating. And the reason is because value is also tied to perception, right? That's something I talk to my kids when they're having issues with their job or whatever, which most of my kids are either working in my business or they're working in the business and doing something else, because we really push entrepreneurship. Brady right now is the one that is for sure working for a company, but he's rising really fast in that company at a young age. And so I'm coaching him right now to stay in there, learn what you can, and then we'll apply that to entrepreneurship, because he turns 21 Sunday. So, but one of the things that I teach them all the time is, listen, they're going to value you at what you are giving to whatever it is you're working on. Okay. And so, it's one of the reasons I mentioned this last week that I don't change my prices for people when they tell me that I've bid too high on something. I'm not going to adjust that. I'm not going to adjust the value that I give you. I'm not going to adjust the quality that I give you. If you want the cheapest option, I totally understand you go with that. But I also prep them at the beginning. I'm probably not going to be your cheapest option. That's because that's just not how I roll. But it's because I want to create immense value. I want to create immense value. And there's 4 levels to doing that. And so I think it'll make sense once we get into it, okay? The first level of value is operation. What this means is I'm literally doing the work. I'm trading my muscles for money. I'm selling my time. Okay? Remember what I told you last week. Time is infinitely more valuable than money. When you so if I multiply a physical resource by a limited resource, I will get a limited result. You understand what I'm saying? So a limited amount of time that I have with a physical resource that I have, I'm always going to get a limited result every single time, which is why we want to build toward creating income producing assets. Okay. So this is the level. A lot of times this level, if you think that if that's the only level where you're always doing the work, you're always trading your time, you're going to be capped. You're going to be capped. And most of the time, you can write this down, the income is going to be somewhere between minimum wage to 80K a year. Minimum wage to 80K a year at this level, where you're just doing the work. The next level is organization. Organization, this is the management level. This is the management level where you're actually you're organizing people who are doing the work. You're managing that a little bit, but at the end of the day, most of the time the company still owns you, and that's true even if you own the company. I have found this to be true, that if you don't have systems and processes in place that actually help you as a business owner do something other than continually run that business with your manual resources, then you do not own a business, you own a job. And that's the case. And so the organization level is, it's a step up from operation, but the next two are when we really get into some serious revenue and income. Okay, but this means I'm managing things. I do have more leverage, but I'm still dependent on this particular structure working. And so the income range for this one is between 40K up to about 250, and that's 250 is good. That's a good level. Okay, so the management level is going to be about about 40K to 250. Okay, now this is when we start getting into some real money. The next one is expression, or you could say communication. This is where you are opening your mouth and you're getting paid for what you say when you say it, whether it has to do with selling, whether it has to do with entertainment, whatever. This is where you start to get into some real serious money in expression, and this is salespeople, authors, speakers. They're the ones that are operating this, and your income level is, your range is so much larger. Okay, so if we're minimum wage to 80K, where I'm doing it myself, and it doesn't mean that you're not going to find somebody who's doing it themselves and not going to make a little more than 80K. Okay, you can, but you're still going to be limited by time, right? Organization up to about 250K. Management, you're going to start around 40 grand, something like that, and go up to about 250. This one is about 100,000 to 100. It can go to 100 million when you're actually communicating, and you figure out how to communicate the message that other people are wanting. And it's not just about speaking. Please understand, it also has to do with sales. That's why if you were to look at statistics, we were talking about this at dinner last night. If you were to look at statistics, there's so many people who get out of college right now and they immediately go into commission sales because they can't make in their field that they studied what they can make in commission sales. It's just the truth. And there are a lot of people. I remember this was probably 15, 20 years ago. I was talking to the medical director at Suburban at the time. And we were talking about the difficulty for doctors and malpractice insurance and all of the things that go in with that. And he told me at that point, this was again 15, 20 years ago, he said, Ryan, he said, the best of the best are no longer getting into medicine because it costs too much money and they can't do it. The best of the best are getting into sales. They're getting into, whether it be medical sales or whatever. And so when you learn to communicate in a way that helps you to get your message out there, and it's not just sales, it can be writing, it can be content, it can all kinds of things. When you learn how to communicate in a way that people want to do it, that's when your income exponentially goes. And then the last one, which is the highest level, is it's vision. You're literally getting paid for your ability to cast vision and use your imagination. So that may mean that your vision, your imagination, also your capital is now making money. So I'm able to dream of ways to have my money make more money. Okay, that's the highest level, and that's infinite. The opportunity for making money is infinite there. You're here. You're no longer trading your time for your effort, and you start that here. You actually start that here. You stop trading time for effort here. Why? Because just like what I told you, remember last week when I was coaching Diana, and I said, the next time you do, the extension or whatever, put a camera there. What am I doing? I'm teaching her to multiply her ability exponentially and turn that into an asset that she can sell on repeat over and over and over again. And that's where that starts right here. Does that make sense? Yeah? Good. Good. Okay. So obsessing over solving other people's problems and creating value for someone, those are two very practical things. And you can begin that process right now. You can begin that process right now. Obsessing over solving a problem for somebody. Find a problem. And again, if you want to make the most money, find a problem that rich people have and solve that problem for them. And they will pay you over and over and over again. They will pay you for the convenience of not having to do it. I know of a person right now who called my wife, and there's this particular product that they wanted, and they said, I want this product, but I don't want to have to order it, and I don't want to have to do this. Can you get it for me? And I said, babe, she's proving my point. What I'm saying, like you have the ability to. Of course, I'm telling her, I'm like, you need to mark it up, whatever you. She's like, no, I'm not going to mark it up. I'm like, whatever, I would mark that joker up because you're doing the work and make the money. But if you learn to solve problems for people, they're going to pay you for that convenience. It will happen over and over and over and over again. Okay. And we have to get these two things solidified. We've got to get this problem solving thing and the creating value thing solidified before we jump into all of the business ideas and the tax strategies and the good and bad debt and acquiring assets and using leverage and all that stuff. Before any of that's going to work for you, you're going to have your philosophy correct around that and what you're trying to do. Because ultimately, if I'm obsessing over solving a problem for someone, what I'm doing is I'm serving them well. I'm serving them well. And that's what Jesus taught us to do, is to serve. And that's what the Jewish people have taught their families for years and years and years. When you do this, you are serving one another. As a matter of fact, if you study Jewish culture, a lot of times, retirement is not a word that they use. Retirement is not a word that they use. They do not look to retire, because in their mind is, if I retire, then I'm stopping serving people, and that's not what God called me to do. And so that's the journey that I'm on. I want to do something where I don't have to retire and I can continue to serve people, for the rest of my life. So it's really important. Really important. The other thing that we talked about last week that I just want to touch briefly is time is of the essence. Time is of the essence. Make as much money as you can, as fast as you can. You remember the example that I gave last week that, a lot of times we'll talk about $1 million being a whole lot of money, right? And it's true. $1 million is, that's great. It's great money. But if it takes me 40 years to make $1 million, I'm not rich. You understand what I'm saying? If it takes me 20 years to make $1 million, I'm not rich. So I want to make as much money as fast as I can, right? And most of us have been sold a bill of goods about this idea of get rich quick and all this other stuff. And I understand the sentiments behind that. But like I said last week, I'd much rather get rich quick than stay broke for a long time. And so we want to shift our minds around that. Time is of the essence. And this is, listen to me, this is why delay is such an inhibitor, okay? Delay and procrastination. It's such an inhibitor. Guys, if there is something that you can do now, do it now. Don't put it off. Here's what's true. And this is a leadership principle that will help you in every area of your life. Procrastination is the predecessor to being overwhelmed. Procrastination is the predecessor to being overwhelmed. You talk to people who, out of their mouth, oh, I'm just so overwhelmed with this, I'm overwhelmed with that. I guarantee you, if you break that down, you talk to them long enough, you're going to find out that there were things that they were putting off that they could have done that would have helped them along the way to not get into that place of being overwhelmed. So procrastination is the predecessor to being overwhelmed. Okay. All right. And guys, I really believe this. Like, if you really want to change your financial landscape and begin living in what I believe that the Lord intended for us, then we have to be people who take action. And I'm going to talk about that more tonight. And I'm going to hold your feet to the fire a little bit too, as far as taking action, because it's just so imperative that you do. We can talk about it all night long. But at the end of the day, if you don't go do something, then intentional thought processes and all of that stuff that don't move into action, it's actually just wasted potential. It's wasted potential. And so you at some point you have to take action. And that comes with breaking with mindsets. We talked about it last week a little bit, breaking with a poverty mindset, breaking with limited beliefs and questions. Okay. A lot of times when I talk to people and we're talking about business, we're talking about finances, we're talking about new ideas and all this stuff, the first thing that comes to mind is, well, what if it doesn't work? And what I want you to do is I want you to remove that from your language completely and begin to dream about, what if it does work? What if it does work? What if what we coached Diana last week works, and she does that and sells that to 250 people? That, think about that. That is like, I can't even tell you how small a percentage of people that is just in the city of Louisville. And that's 50 grand just like that for 3-4 hours worth of work potentially. So what does that mean? She says it to, I think she texted me later that night, and it got me thinking. So I put in, man, what would that be if she sold that to 2,500 people? $500,000, just like that. 2,500 people is like 0.0000000% of the population just of this city. You understand what I'm saying? Much less the nation and the world. So break with the limiting mindsets. We have to break with the philosophy. What if it doesn't work? That is a poverty mindset. What if it doesn't work? What if it does? What if it blows up? What if it absolutely blows up? You understand what I'm saying? That's how I want you to think. Am I good enough to do this? Yes, you are. Absolutely. You're good enough to do this. You were created in the image of God and equipped with a portion of his creativity. You are good enough to do whatever it is that you need to do. What will people think if I fail? Who cares? Who cares? We build so much around that. What will people think if I fail? Who cares? I know for sure what they're going to think if you succeed. Dang, I wish I'd have done that. I wish I hadn't procrastinated. I wish I had have invented the product. I wish I would have done the marketing. You understand what I'm saying? Who cares what people think? That's one thing Dave Ramsey used to say all the time that I really did appreciate. He was like, stop taking financial advice from your broke brother-in-law. No, if they're not doing it at a high level, they don't get a voice in this thing that I'm trying to do. It doesn't mean that I don't love them. Doesn't mean I don't honor them. I can't learn certain things from them. But if I'm worried about people who are not doing it at a high level, thinking I might look silly if I fail, no way. They don't get a vote. They don't get a vote. Okay, and so we have to change our mindset. Here's the other thing, and this is huge, guys. This is huge. And last week I talked about, the lower class people that they work just for paying their bills, right? And middle class people work to pay their bills so that their credit is good, so that they can buy things that they really can't afford, but they've got good credit so they can do that, right? And most of the time in those two places, and I'm guilty of it as well, the first question to come out of our mouth when we start talking about things is, well, what's it going to cost? What's it going to cost? And I remember when I started hanging around people who were much wealthier than I was. We were on a trip, and for me it was a trip of a lifetime. And I was with a friend, and this guy was, he was very, very wealthy, and we were talking about parking. And I was a young man, very young man, and I was like, "Oh, well, what's it cost?" And he looked at me sideways. He's like, "It costs what it costs. It just is what it is." And that's the truth. One of the questions we ask all the time is, what's it going to cost? And here's the question I want to ask you. What's it going to cost you if you don't do it? How much is it going to cost you if you don't jump in? How much is it going to cost you if you don't seek the help or the coaching or whatever it may be that you need to do? What's it going to cost you if you don't create the content, if you don't develop the program, if you don't, how much is that costing you? We don't think about that. Exponentially, you could add zeros to what it costs. Exponential. And so I really want us to break with that mindset. Okay. So we're going to start obsessing over solving people's problems, and we're going to serve them, and we're going to obsess over creating a higher level. Okay, let's jump into this idea about the kingdom lens. Everybody good? Okay. Here's our thought process. The kingdom, the way we view it through the kingdom, God as sovereign owner, and I am a steward over an assignment. Okay? God as the sovereign owner of everything, and me as the steward over an assignment. The kingdom of God is not a religion. It's not a democracy. We don't get a vote. It's not a republic. It is a sovereign nation. It governs from heaven to earth through the absolute authority of the king, whose personal will purpose, and intent are law. We need to understand that, okay? We need to understand that about the kingdom of God. It governs from heaven to earth through the absolute authority of the king, whose personal will, purpose, and intent are the law. Here's how it works. The king and absolute law. God is not an elected official. He does not consult a Congress or answer to a majority vote, okay? His authority is inherent. When he speaks, his word becomes supreme law immediately. His decrees do not go to a committee. They don't get debated. They stand. That's why it's so important that you understand when the Lord speaks something to you, within that word that he speaks to you is the ability to perform that. He's not looking for a vote. He's not even looking for your agreement. He is the king, right? And so when he speaks a word over you, over your family, whatever that is, many of you have words right now. I have words that I'm waiting to come to pass for my family, for my future, for my business, for my finances, for for the nations of the world. I have words. I have a list of them that I keep. Why? Because I want to steward those words because he spoke it. It is absolutely going to happen. That's how the kingdom works. The sovereign word of the king being spoken. It's not up for vote. It's not even up for my agreement, right? Now, I can run away from it, but that word is going to produce itself somehow, right? His word will not return to him void. And so it's so important that we understand that specifically around finances, okay? So the king, his word is absolute law. The constitution for that kingdom is the Bible, right? The Bible is the kingdom's legal document. It's not a book of religious rituals. It literally outlines our rights, our privileges, and the laws of the government in covenant language. That's what the Bible does. It outlines those things in covenant language, okay? Now, here's the next thing. You are not a church member. You are a citizen of a kingdom, the kingdom of heaven, and an ambassador on assignment. Now, listen to this. An ambassador does not speak personal opinions. Why is that important? Because what I told you just a while ago, a lot of times our first thought is, well, what if it doesn't work? How much is it going to cost? Do we think that God is up there releasing strategies saying, man, this is a crapshoot. I hope this works, but I'm not sure if it really will. It's not how he operates. It's not how he operates. So as citizens of the kingdom, we only speak the constitution of the kingdom. That's what we speak. We speak not our personal opinions. We speak the exact position of the kingdom. So this is where we get into mindset. I have to believe the position of the kingdom when it comes to business and finance. Okay? Now here's the next thing that's really interesting about the kingdom. The government is fully responsible for the citizens or the ambassador. The government of the kingdom is fully responsible for the citizens. It's the king's responsibility. How is it governed on earth? Through the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is the governor sent from the king to this colony. That's the Holy Spirit, okay? And I know I'm going a little deep on this, but I really think it's important for us because we think in democratic language. We think in if it doesn't get the right vote or I don't agree or whatever. And I'm telling you, the kingdom operates differently than that, okay? One of the things that I've taught for years and years and years, God doesn't have the ability to see defeat. He does not sit up there and say, hey, I'm going to give this to them, but it's probably not going to work. It's just not how he operates. He only sees dominion. He only sees dominion. He only sees the good, the plans that he had for you before you were in your mother's womb to give you a hope, to prosper you. That's how he views your future. Do I walk away from that sometimes? Absolutely. But it doesn't change the fact that that is still true, what he has declared over me and my family, okay? And that is so important. And that is managed by the Holy Spirit in us, okay, to train us to carry the culture, the language, and the nature of heaven, okay? That's how a kingdom works. That's how if you go to the Bahamas right now, it's still connected to the UK, right? Because they established the Bahamas as a colony under the rule of the king, And so if you go there, there are still things that are happening that look a whole lot like what's happening in the UK, because it is a colony. It's a British colony. Okay. So that's why I think it's so important for us to grasp this around the kingdom, and how that works with finance. Now, the other thing that happens in the kingdom is it's a commonwealth economy. Okay. So wealth in the kingdom is common to all citizens. The king's personal reputation is tied directly to the standard of living of his people. So poverty among citizens is a public embarrassment to the king. All right. So the government actively moves wealth and resources toward uh, those who belong to that kingdom. So that's why I want to break this idea. And I know, in some circles, and I don't think that we believe this in here, but in some circles they believe that lack and being poor it makes you more holy and closer to God. It's just not true. It's just not true. The richest person to ever live in the history of the world was appointed by God as king over Israel. Seriously. And I understand that these are practical things, but I really want you to get this. I'm not talking about living in with frivolous things and all of that stuff. But there's nothing wrong with being blessed. I am convinced. Listen, Jesus's garment did not have a seam in it. What does that mean? It means it was an expensive garment that he was wearing that did not have a seam. If it was not expensive, the soldiers would not have been gambling for it, trying to get it when they crucified him. If there wasn't money in Jesus' ministry, he would not have needed a treasurer. He would not have needed a treasurer. And so this idea that we have to be broke and we have to prove our piety by our poverty, it's just a lie. It's a lie of the enemy, and that's not how it works in the kingdom. Okay. So the last thing I want to say about the kingdom is this: that the primary function of the kingdom is colonization. It's to fill the earth with the exact culture, nature, and lifestyle of heaven. Remember what I said last week in Genesis chapter 2. God says that the garden, the rivers, and the areas around the garden were full of gold, and the gold was good. Okay. Again, I'm just trying to retrain our mindset to understand that being blessed, walking with influence, and walking with affluence, it's okay. And we need to begin to think that way and understand that the Lord wants us to do that. Now, listen, your motives matter. Your motives matter. If you're just chasing money to have money, that's not how it works. Remember, I said that last week, that we love Proverbs 13:22, that the wealth of the wicked is laid up for the righteous. And that's true, but it's not laid up for people who don't know how to handle money and are not thinking generationally and don't have a kingdom mindset. Because why? Because God is a good steward. He's not going to ask you to be a good steward if he's not going to be a good steward. You understand what I'm saying? Yeah. Okay. So colonization is so important. You are here to transform the culture to mirror the kingdom. And so God puts us on earth to transform the colony until it looks like the home country. Okay. Now, the most fundamental principle of kingdom finance and business is this, and you need to get this: God owns it all. God owns it all. Romans 11:36 proves this for us. For from him all things originate, and through him all things live and exist, and to him all things are directed. To him be glory and honor forever. Amen. This verse lays out three propositions for us that settle this completely. Everything originates from God. He's the dynamic force sustaining and controlling all of creation, and all things will eventually return to him for accountability. He made it. He controls it. It goes back to him. Everything is his. That is the fundamental kingdom lens of business and finance. Okay. So now, where do I fit in? Where do I fit into that? I am a steward. That is a legal word by definition. A steward is a person put into power by a king to manage the king's household, estate, and domestic concerns. I am a servant given delegated authority to manage what he has entrusted to me. Listen to this. If you want to win at a high level and see things from a kingdom lens, and really jump into this idea of kingdom business and finance, then you need to accept the responsibility of being trustworthy. Can God trust me with more? Can the systems and the structures that I am creating handle the weight of inheritance? So how do I do that at a high level? How do I prove that I'm trustworthy? How do I increase that? It's number one, it's skill mastery. Like you actually work at mastering skills. You actually work at being really, really good at something or multiple things, but it's mastering skill. Number two, it's continual learning. Listen, the enemy of learning is thinking you already know. The enemy of learning is thinking that you already know. And so continual learning is how I prove that I'm trustworthy. Stretching my capacity, growing what I can handle, growing what I can take on. Financial literacy, like actually learning what does money do? How does money operate? How does it multiply? How do I manage it? How do I handle it? This is proving that I'm trustworthy. And then I believe entrepreneurship is the last one. Entrepreneurship. And here's the deal with stewardship, just like with giving. And I don't know if I mentioned this last week, but if you've been around me for any length of time, you've heard me say this. People who say, you know, I can't give, or I don't have the money to give, or whatever. It's not a money issue. It is a lordship issue. It is a lordship issue. And if he is not the Lord over that issue in your life, it will continue to come up. Whatever it is that is not submitted completely to him is a lordship issue. It's not a monetary issue, okay? It's just not, because his principles work, and his principles are what? His automations. God's principles are his automations, okay? So the issues of poverty and money are always issues of the heart. They're lordship issues. And accepting the role of a steward means that I abandon the illusion of personal ownership. Okay? I'm not saying what's mine. I'm saying I'm asking this. What has the king entrusted to me, and how does he want me to manage that? How does he want me to manage it? Okay? So I am a steward given an assignment. That's how the kingdom works. Okay. So authority is an alignment issue. Human authority over any earthly endeavor is strictly contingent on vertical submission. What do I mean by that? If God has given me authority over anything, and he has, we learned he gave us authority, right? It's what we talked about last week. It's the be do have thing, right? It's we get to my identity, my authority, my assignment, all of that, or my identity, assignment, and authority, right? And so he does, but that is all contingent on my vertical submission to him. It is delegated authority. That is the lens of the kingdom. It's delegated authority, okay? It's also dominion over domains. God explicitly designed humans to have dominion over the earth, its skills, and its resources. He says it in Genesis 1. Have dominion over these things, okay? So it's so important that we understand that we are supposed to prosper. We're supposed to grow things. We're supposed to watch things multiply, okay? The next thing is the actual kingdom operation. The functional kingdom lens requires these three steps, okay? Number one, yielding my life to God as the sovereign king. Number two, ruling over the resulting assignment with delegated authority. And then number three, using the assignment to serve every human being that I encounter. So when I was prepping for this, we had a great question come in. Two great questions. Actually, I think Jason may have asked both of these. Number one, does seed always produce fruit? Does seed always produce fruit? And here's how I would answer that. Good seed sown into good soil in the right environment will always produce fruit. That's really important. That's really important. Because you can sow good seed into good soil and it not be the right environment, and it's not going to produce fruit. What am I talking about? Soil in Iowa is amazing for growing corn, but you're not going to take lemon seeds and orange seeds and put them into that soil and it produce the harvest that it would produce in the southern part of the United States, Florida and places like that. So good seed sown into good soil in the right environment will always produce fruit. This is part of the Genesis 8:22 principle. From now on, there will be seed time and harvest. Okay? Now, what is the difference between seed and bread? 2 Corinthians 9:10. Now, he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food will supply and multiply your seed for sowing and increase the harvest of your righteousness. Here's what I want to tell you. Seed is for sowing. Bread is for consuming. I want you to understand this because sowing seed and reaping a harvest is a principle. It is not a miracle for seed to produce fruit or for seed to multiply. That is not a miracle. It's absolutely a miracle for bread to multiply. That is a miracle. Okay? We see that when Jesus was handing out the loaves and the fishes. That was a miracle that met the need that they had. Okay? So it's not a miracle for seed to multiply. I want you to get that. If you sow seed into good soil, good seed into good soil in the right environment, it is going to produce fruit, and that is not a miracle. It's a principle. Okay? So the key to biblical financial success is having the discipline to accurately identify and separate the two. So that means I'm faithfully living on the bread. That's what I consume daily. But I'm intentionally planting the seed. Okay. So the ultimate goal is this, that the seed produces more seed and harvest. That is the ultimate goal, that the seed produces more seed and harvest. The bread is what I eat daily, and understanding that God supplies that as well. Yes. But once the seed begins to produce fruit, then I add to the bread from the produce of that seed. In other words, what I sow into income producing assets grows what I consume daily. Okay. Here's the thing. And this is just kind of how I do it. If I start a new business or if I start a new venture or a new idea, whatever it is, I set in my mind and in my system as I'm developing it, that I'm going to sow seed and I'm going to invest, but I am not going to go beyond that investment until that initial investment begins to produce something. Okay? Because I'm not going to take from my daily bread that I have to use for daily consumption and make that seed, because that's a fallacy as well. Right? Some people think, well, I'm just going to sow everything into this, and then they don't. That's just bad financial literacy. They're not thinking. You're going to have to live. You're going to have to do that. But you can't withhold your seed as well and expect that the bread is going to continue to come. And so what you want to do is you want to create a system where what you sow and you invest begins to produce fruit. And then that's where you begin to add to your bread for whatever your daily consumption may be, or whatever you want to buy. I'm not going to take the money that I need to live on and go buy liabilities. You understand what I'm saying? I'm going to take the seed that I have and I'm going to be intentional about that. I'm going to break that up. And there are so many formulas. I could give you one. You probably have one. There's so many formulas we could do. I mean, we could say, 10, 10, 80, 10, 10, 10, 70 on the amount of money that's coming in, what you're going to sow, what you're going to save, what you're going to invest, all of those different things. And I'm not here to teach you that tonight. We can get into that later if you want to. And you can ask questions and we can figure out what works for you. What I'm saying is, at the end of the day, if money comes into my house, the very first thing that I do is I sow seed immediately into the kingdom. I give. That's where my charitable giving goes, most of it, into the kingdom. Yes, into my local church, but then into other ministries, into other things. I've told you before, and if you haven't heard me say this is so true. At the beginning of the year, I set giving goals, because I want to give away money. Why? Why would I do that? Why would I set those goals? Because he just told me right here, he who supplies seed to the sower. So if I want him to give me more seed, all I have to do is dream up ways to give that away. And so I do. I partner with him and I'm like, hey, what do you want to do? How can we give this away? How can we give this amount of money away or whatever? And I have certain goals and those goals grow exponentially. If I hit one year, then that goal grows the next year, the amount that I want to give away. You understand what I'm saying? And so because I trust his principle, all right? So I want to be able to discern the difference, but I also want to know this. And let me say this: I'm not giving to God with the motive of He's going to give it back to me. That's not why I give to Him. That's not why I give to the kingdom. That's not why. Yes, it is a principle that it works because good seed in good soil in the right environment always produces fruit. So yes, it's a principle that works, but the motive matters. The motive matters. When I invest in real estate, when I invest in crypto, when I invest in stocks or whatever it is, I am absolutely investing that to get a return. And so I'm going to be as smart as I possibly can in those things. All right. I'm giving out of obedience my seed. And then as I grow the seed that keeps coming in my investments or whatever it is, then my bread pile begins to grow. And that's where I feel comfortable buying things and doing life from that pile. Does that make sense? So there is a distinct difference between seed and bread, and you cannot consume your seed and expect a harvest. You just can't. You can't. You can sit back and you can pray all day long for multiplication, but if you're not sowing seed, it cannot multiply. You understand what I'm saying? If you consume, can you imagine a farmer that has to plant rows and rows and rows of corn, and then he eats all the corn and he has nothing to plant for the next year? It just doesn't work. And so you absolutely have to learn not to consume your seed. Okay, so we have to distinguish between bread, which is for consumption, seed for sowing. Multiplication is a principle for seed, and when you sow into the kingdom, you invoke the power of the supernatural to produce a 30, 60, and sometimes 100-fold return. That's just how it works. It's just how it works. But your motive matters in that. Okay?